Good afternoon, I'm Imogen Bakra and welcome to this COP26 debrief, giving you bite-sized insight on the latest COP26 discussions and developments. Today was Finance Day. To achieve the UN climate change goals, every business must adapt and the role of finance is crucial. Today's videocast from COP26 focuses on how finance flows can be mobilised to take action on climate change. I'm joined by our climate and ESG specialists, James Close and Caroline Haas, who are on the ground at COP26 to hear their key takeaways. So let's get straight into it. To start with, I have a question for both of you, but Caroline, I'll start with you if that's okay. So can you tell us what changes to green financing developments you're hearing about, both on the positive and the negative side?
No, thank you, Imogen. I think today has been really fascinating just to listen to the different stakeholders talk about how they want to mobilize capital. And one of the speakers was the finance ministry from Uruguay, and they were looking at a sustainable linked bond, really kind of tie their environmental ambitions to their financing. And they really wanted to sort of mainstream the NDCs and then place them into the bond market. And so really kind of innovative, new. This hasn't been done before, and it just underpins the fact that you're looking at sort of those sectors and expansion or diversification as well as the products. In addition, it was the Climate Investment Fund that was also looking at sort of expanding the portfolio that they already have, where they're supporting the developing countries, and at the same time de-risking where I would say the more mainstream institutional investors don't feel that comfortable through guarantees, and then issuing in the bond markets so that you have the exposure and you have the ability to help in the developing countries, particularly with regard to mitigation and adaptation, but not having the respective risk associated with some of these countries. On a negative, I think it's actually been an incredibly positive experience. So it's actually quite hard to kind of pull out the negatives. One of the comments that was made was we don't really need more labels. And that actually the underlying products exist in the finance world. So what we really need to do is just use the products at hand and now kind of collaborate, bring together different parties to actually find the respective solutions versus kind of putting the time and energy into more labels. James?
Yeah, well, I think it's really been well framed here today. We started off with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero breakfast, at which Alison spoke, and that was joined with Janet Yellen and other finance ministers, including Rishi Sunak, and also Mark Carney, who's leading on GFANZ. And I think what has come out is that the finance is now in the room around climate change, and the talk of 135 billion of assets, funds, and banking capital being available is really transforming the conversation. It's bringing it to life in a way that says, we have this net zero commitment. We need to figure out how we can mobilize finance to enable us to deliver it. And the money will come into the room and will make itself available. And the question back to government is, what are you going to do to enable that? How can you facilitate it through policy? And how can you drive regulatory approaches which enable that to happen, both in terms of reducing reliance on fossil fuels, but also accelerating the shift to renewables, but also other clean forms of activity like electric vehicles, or indeed when you get into emerging markets, the sorts of things you can do for avoiding land use loss and deforestation, and also agriculture and the whole food systems discussion. So the big picture is we've got to change, and the money's there. The question now is, how do we do that? And that's where I think we come in as an organisation in terms of practical solutions to enable that to happen for our customers.
So, Caroline, after today, would you say that there's now more clarity on the part investment funds will play in a net zero future?
So it's interesting. Obviously, investment funds play a big role, but actually it's across all financing products. So it'll go from the lending to the debt down all the way to equity. And each of those will have specific players that will play the role in the net zero. So obviously NatWest Group, with regard to the lending, plays an instrumental role. And Alison Rose today spoke passionately about the role that we will be playing lending to the SMEs, both from a side of their decarbonization strategies, but also supporting those climate and sort of clean tech companies, enabling them to scale and find the markets, becoming part of the supply chains, and really working with them. We've just opened up the accelerator hubs to really give them that platform and that dialogue with us so that we can find the right financing products for them, which will also then include obviously introductions further to some of those institutional investors who are establishing the investment funds. The other thing that was interesting yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen announced €1 billion that she's working in partnership with Bill Gates, as well as the EIB, with regard to Catalyst, which is a fund targeted specifically, again, to these climate or clean tech companies. And similarly, BlackRock has partnered with Temasek, where they're also doing exactly the same thing. So I think we're really trying to mobilize capital to these smaller companies that have great ideas and really giving them the financial clout to grow and to do the R&D that they'll need, as well as then getting their sort of mitigation and adaptation solutions into the market. So yeah, no, it's been incredibly positive seeing how that kind of money is starting to be discussed and obviously mobilized. James?
Yeah, I think that's it's really interesting the way these coalitions are coming together and people are starting to collaborate, and I think that's very true of the finance sector. And I would characterize it a little bit, having been to quite a lot of these COPs and seen that the power of finance can bring. And the previous ones, the finance sector has been in the room a bit of an afterthought almost. They've been sort of drawn in and told to come. This time, the finance sector is being really proactive. I think we've bought into the story that net zero is the growth story of the 21st century, and finance wants to play the role that enables us to unlock that growth story and facilitate. Now, there's still some big challenges, not least the fact that emerging markets need to increase their creditworthiness. They do need the support that enables them to have institutional capacity, and also the sorts of de-risking that multilaterals, for example, can bring. And it's also interesting to see the role of multilateralism in this world where finance is being provided by the private sector being questioned. And what can multilateralism bring to enable finance to flow as effectively as it possibly can? And it does feel like a different type of conversation. And I've had a couple of conversations with people who've said that this is transformational. Today is the day that will make a big difference to the way in which we address the climate emergency. And it's a very, very powerful feeling.
Sounds like a super interesting day. So just to wrap this up, again, a question for both of you, but looking ahead to the future, what do you think will most help turbocharge the green finance market? And Caroline, perhaps you go first and then pass over to James again.
All right. No, thank you. You know what? I think it's really interesting to say what James said earlier. I mean, we're really rewiring the global economy. And I think this is really important. So this is going to infiltrate everything we do. And so some of it that's been kind of commented on is transparency, reporting, standardization. All of these things will really, really help to kind of bring us all together, and then we can actually collaborate. And I think this is, right now, we're still sort of all trying to solve some of these problems in our own little, in our own jurisdictions, in our own companies, whichever. And so now having that kind of level of comparability is going to be really, really important. And then also so that we avoid any sort of implications of greenwashing or anything. So everybody knows when we say X, it means X, and everybody understands what that actually means.
Transparency. And I think the reporting requirements are a really interesting part of that transparency. Standardization, Caroline's talked about that, being really clear about what the standards are, trying to converge them, reducing the alphabet soup of initiatives that there are out there so that the real economy can figure out what to do and how to report on this. And then thirdly, pricing the externalities. And, the issue of carbon pricing has come up again in a really positive way. And I think that can make also a huge contribution to supporting the rewiring of the economy. So that combination of the long-term goals and the pricing of the externalities together with the standardization and transparency could be a really powerful enabler of this system change that we're trying to strive towards.
Great, that all sounds really positive. Well, that's all for this COP26 videocast. Thank you, James, and thank you, Caroline, for those insights fresh from COP26. And thank you, viewers, for joining us. If you'd like more views and actionable ideas on the trends shaping the business landscape, please subscribe to our social channels. See you again soon.